Hello, this is Alexis Shadow here, and I am reporting on Captain Frederick Greenawalt. Captain Frederick Greenawalt was born on the year of 1947 in Detroit, Michigan. Mr. Greenawalt was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and he even received medical corpsman training in his early years of service. Before he joined the service, though, Mr. Greenawalt was dedicated to doing other forms of schooling at the time.
Well, I had a long series of going to elementary school, junior high school, and senior high school, and one semester of college.
As Mr. Greenawalt was preparing himself for his long journey in the military, he gained tons of amazing skills that he used during his time as a veteran.
For war, I had to learn to take orders or instruction from teachers and principals, and then I had to learn to take seriously rank and privileges that you have as you're getting promoted. And that happened when I wanted to become a patrol officer and just help students cross highways and be on the bus and do bus safety, and that all had to play later on in my training in the military. I actually became the captain of the patrols in my elementary school, and that started a time where I said, I wonder if I could become a real captain someday.
Once Mr. Greenawalt got his footing on the concept of the military, he decided to enlist. Mr. Greenawalt departed for training camp and was made to do tons and tons of training. But on his first day, he took training a little too seriously and ended up in the hospital.
As I tried to run too fast in my boots, and I ran faster than I should have run, and I ran as hard as I could, and then we got to run back to the company area where we fell into formation, and I literally fell onto the asphalt, and I passed out. So my first day in the Army was not good, but I did find the ambulance crews were nice, and they took care of me and saved me and took me to the hospital and fixed me up. After that experience, I learned to pace myself a little bit.
Thankfully, Mr. Greenawalt was able to recover because he would need his strength for more challenges in his lifetime. Before Mr. Greenawalt could follow his dreams, though, he needed to go through some basic training first.
Well, I knew I wouldn't qualify to become an officer because I didn't have enough college. I went to the University of Towson in Towson, Maryland, Baltimore, and I only went there for one semester, and then I joined the Army. But I wanted to eventually become a pilot. That was my great dream. And the Army had other plans. They wanted to send me to every school they ever put in the Army. Okay? And so after basic training, they sent me to medical corpsman school. And I learned to be a combat medic. And that was a great experience, especially all the training we had to do with gas masks and operations that you have to do in the battlefield.
Along with all the medical corpsman training Mr. Greenawalt had to do, he had a little bit of fun with the sergeants and his wordplay during his experience in Vietnam and in training.
First, when we departed for training camp, I got to be in charge of the bus of trainees who drove from Baltimore, which we call B-more, and I found out the sergeants would say, B-more, you're from B-more, you should have been more. Been more careful and not get yourself stuck in this situation you're in. And so I learned that the sergeants could play with any words that I said and make some kind of funny statement about it and turn it into an order. So I was supposed to be in charge of all these recruits and make sure they got to the Fort Bragg where we took our basic training. The problem was I didn't have any rank. I didn't have a uniform. I didn't have anything on my shoulder to say I was in charge of anybody. I learned that you better get some rank if you're going to become someone that the others in the military will listen to readily and respect, hopefully.
Mr. Greenawalt had to also embark on a journey that involved his medical corpsman training, and it actually saved a man's life one day.
I saved a man whose whole body was ripped up by a tail rotor, and he was torn all the way up to his torso, all the way, and bleeding like you never saw anybody bleed. And I didn't have enough fuel to come back and get him because another group dropped him off, and they called for me to try to medevac him. I couldn't because I didn't have enough fuel. And I asked all the members of the crew, guys, we don't have the fuel to go. If you go, we might go down, and we will have a real good chance of going down in jungle. And everyone on that helicopter said, let's go get the guy. That was a Vietnamese man. He was bleeding to death. And we got him, and we got him to the hospital, and about 4 months later, he said, don't you recognize me? I said, no, sir, I don't know you at all. He lifted up his shirt, and there was the worst scar you ever saw in your life. And I just knew I was with a crew of brave men and wonderful men that were willing to lay down their life for the Vietnamese people. And so it's very hard for me on the way the war ended, the way it was terminated. And
During Mr. Greenawalt's flight training, he had met some flight officers and trainers that left an everlasting impression on him. Many of these lessons helped him in learning how to fly a helicopter correctly as well as safely.
Oh, some of my instructors came a little bit later after I was an officer. They were instructors that were flight instructors, and they were civilians teaching infantry graduates as flight instructors that had lots of experience. And I loved it because they sent me to flight school, and I learned to be a pilot. And my instructor for the first 6 months of flight training was a civilian. And he got in the habit of kicking me in the leg every time I made a mistake. If he didn't kick me in the leg, he lit up a cigar. And if you get in the cockpit of an aircraft or a helicopter, in my case, it gets kind of foggy with a cigar in the cockpit, and it was a choking, kicking time for me to learn how to fly. But I learned that man was an expert at flying, and I could learn a lot of things from him, and it was a great blessing and a privilege to have that as one of my instructors. But I had so many sergeants and so many lieutenants and so many captains, and occasionally we would see other ranking officers, and I wondered about them, what it was like to be those kind of ranking officers. And they would train me for everything from discipline and how to conduct myself as someone that would be a good officer, and then do the things that are part of the military experience. I actually went to Fort Hood, Texas, and was working with the tankers and learned some of the great armor training, and then I had to learn a little bit of adjusting artillery when I went to officer training school. And so I learned about armor and artillery, and now I was a graduate from the Army Flight School when I finished off at Fort Rucker, Alabama. And it was that time that my wife, Yvonne, gave birth to our first child, and her name was Lana Kristen. And Lana was 15 days old when I went to Vietnam in 1969.
On Mr. Greenawalt's way to Vietnam, he needed to first go through Ben Hoa. During his experience there, he went through some rough patches on his first day. He said that he never wants to get a welcome to Vietnam like this again.
They said, you can spend the night here and get into this little bunk, which was everything you would want to have if you didn't like to sleep or if you didn't want to be comfortable. Because I got in a bunk and there was mosquito netting around me. And I thought, well, that's going to keep me safe from at least mosquitoes. Maybe I won't die the first day in Vietnam. So I got in there, but I didn't know how to keep my arms and legs away from the netting. I woke up with about 30 mosquito bites all over my body. For the first day was a welcome to I would not get again in Vietnam because I learned to keep away from the mosquito netting. Now,
After his rough experience, Mr. Greenawalt has learned to keep away from the mosquito netting while he sleeps. Mr. Greenawalt made many sacrifices for his fellow brothers in combat, and he also had to watch as some of them died right when he was just starting to get to know them. He had to dig one of his friends 6 feet out from underneath the ground.
I just wanted to say, I ran into the man and I knocked him down by accident. And he fell down on the metal plating and he scratched his back all up and tore it up. That night, he was called to go out on a night mission in an H-1G Cobra, and it was a terrifying thing. The next morning when we were all awakened, our mission was to go out and find those 2 pilots. And we found them. 6 feet deep. They must have gone in about 200 knots, upside down and at a terrible angle. And we had our services for the 2 pilots and the one that I hurt the day that I played football with them. I will never, ever forget that experience of looking for somebody that I accidentally was playing with and hurt. I didn't mean to hurt him, and he was tough. He just said, sure, I'll go out on the night mission. It was his last.
In this example, you need to always keep yourself on guard, and always remember that each day could be your last, no matter what you were doing in the service. Mr. Greenawalt mentions that when a man dies before he gets to go home, that he is taking place of another fellow veteran that should have been able to go home and see his family. But instead, Mr. Greenawalt was the one that got to go instead of the other veteran.
And I want to tell you one thing. We had what was called R&R in Vietnam, and we could go to places and have about a week, not quite a week, 6 days or so vacation. And I saved it up so I could go see my wife at Christmas in Hawaii. And when I went to see my wife Christmas in Hawaii, I gave up coming home because I knew I took the place of the man who was killed. Later, about 25 years later, they found the wreckage of Captain Castro. And I don't know if his name is carved on the wall down there in Washington, D.C. yet or not. I don't know. But I know who I took his place. And coming home has been the recognition that no matter where a man is on this planet, he can choose to love or he can choose to hate. And he can choose to forgive or he can choose to harden his heart. And I have chosen to try to live and love people and do the best that I could to forgive people, both enemies and wonderful friends. So that's what it's like to try to get used to coming home. It's a totally different world in so far as saying jungles and monsoon rains and all kinds of the noise of battle and the screams and the burning and the stinking of battle and all the things that go on in war. But I sure have loved being in the USA, back home. And I sure have loved my family. And I am so grateful that I have a wife that is trying her very best to help me through life in the last years and months of my experience.
Mr. Greenawalt had a total of 6 daughters, and only one of them in which was born when he was in the service. The other 5 he was there for their births.
My wife sent me care packages, and in the care packages would be cookies, sometimes donuts or brownies or something, and a love letter. And she would send it every day, a letter. And my brothers and sisters and parents would write to me. I cannot tell parents and brothers and sisters of soldiers how important those letters are. It is a great thing to get mail when you're far 10,000 miles away from home, and somebody cared enough to make cookies. And my even 4-year-old sister helped make the cookies. I couldn't hardly tell them from the other sister, Deborah, that was a lot older, but she helped my little sister. And my wife picked up my picture every day, I think, and showed it to my 15-day-old, 16-day-old, 17-day-old daughter that got to be 1 year old. And when I came home from Vietnam, I was welcomed by my daughter. She looked up into my face and said one word, "Daddy, Daddy." She was taught what I looked like by my wife actually training her that this face was the daddy and she was the mommy.
With the little time we have here, Mr. Greenawalt wanted to let everyone know what he would say to Vietnam if he could actually talk to Vietnam. He has a thing to say about the experience.
If you would allow me, I would say thank you. And that word, because my government gave me the best training, the best equipment, the best everything they could give me, and the men that lived and died there with me gave their best. And I could like to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And this, everyone who is watching, is a summary of the service of Captain Frederick Greenawalt. Always remember a fallen soldier and make use of the time you have with the living ones, because they are the people that can make this world great again. So, thank you.